Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is not Motivity Admin. It is Catherine Martin, and I appreciate you being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We'll give people a minute or two to start, and then we'll get started. As a quick introduction, while we are waiting for people to join, like I said, my name is Catherine Martin. I'm a BCBA and enablement lead with Motivity, and I've been with Motivity since 2022, which I cannot believe. Today, we are going to be talking about real-time adherence to cues within sessions, as well as session metrics that inform BCBAs on things like treatment intensity and dosage as it relates to how sessions are being run. I was going to say in the real world, but of course, so how sessions are being run and how significant that data is. We're going to look at it both from the perspective of your frontline staff. What supports can be provided so that they're able to make decisions in session about what targets and goals they should be working on and how BCBAs can help inform that. And then also how BCBAs can look at data like in-session metrics to start to make really important decisions when it comes to supervision and any sort of adjustments they need to make for a treatment plan. Really excited to talk through these things today because as a BCBA myself, I've worked in schools, homes, community, telehealth, like many BCBAs have, because behavior happens everywhere, and so we find ourselves everywhere. And especially when I was starting off as a BCBA, I definitely overloaded goals and maybe expectations of how many goals could be run per session. And then, especially as you moved out of that approach of being in schools or in clinics where you're able to see, you're not necessarily doing supervision every day, but you are able to see a client every day. I shifting to a telehealth community or in-home service delivery model, I often had questions about, how effective are sessions? What are we seeing? So we'll be talking through today some different tools and how this data really helps inform really important clinical decisions like supervision or just overall modifications to a treatment plan. Which brings me to some of the questions that I just described, we've probably all maybe experienced. So we know that sessions are busy, regardless of the age you're working with, but of course for some of our younger learners, but sessions are really busy, but it's most important to understand, are they effective? So are we actually targeting the programs that we need to be? Are the right programs being run? This is important when also thinking about is your team running programs, and this is where that supervision comes into place. Are they able to use some of their environment to find opportunities for learning, especially when we think about NET type goals? But in general, we don't just want to think about this from the perspective of, DTT, seated, table time type goals in ABA. We really want to look at this as we evolve in our field and we look at these learning opportunities, again, are we able to take advantage of things within the environment? And it can be difficult to identify if staff are doing that when you're having to look really specific or you have to really dig into your data. But that is what's important about ABAs, where we're finding the right opportunities and good opportunities and enough learning opportunities. And so then also, are staff using session time efficiently and effectively? Are they able to, 3 hour session can seem like a long time, especially for a frontline staff who's maybe with that learner throughout the week multiple times. But are they able to utilize session time efficiently? And are they making the best of the time that they have to target the goals that you're working on when it comes to medically necessary skills? And then, like I said, I was a BCBA that tended to kind of overload caseloads, especially in the beginning. So putting a significant number of goals that probably were not realistic for the amount of time spent. But I felt like without having some sort of metric data, well, I'm going to put all of these goals and then I'll figure out maybe where we need to pull back. So these are questions that I think a lot of BCBAs think about, but there's other priorities that sometimes take over. And so if we can give this data faster, make it easier to read, easier to capture and visualize, then you can answer some of these questions without having to dig in and spend so much time graph by graph seeing what happened in that session. So what that looks like today on Motivity is what you'll see here. So here's an example, and I'll share my screen towards the end of the presentation today. But when we think about how to answer some of those questions, again, this data should be easy to capture because you want to be spending time on the right things. And so here's an example of after a session's been run within Motivity, you can see data. You can see it specific to the phase. So you could say, I want to look at all of the phases, baseline, train, and maintenance. Or I just want to focus on train because again, you know that maintenance and baseline goals are going to be run slightly differently. So if we're just looking at our goals that are currently in teaching, I get data on how many programs were run, how many targets were run, and how many trials were run. Now that data is embedded in my individual session raw data, which we also show you, but now I can capture it a lot faster. I don't have to look at how many trials and add that up. Now I can just quickly see, okay, for the length of time of this session, we had 6 programs run. Is that good? Is that what we want to see, or would we want to see more? There was only 9 targets run. Would we want to see more? Would we want to see more? Most likely, I was going to say less. And then the number of trials run. What I can also see here is, was there any significant behavior which is maybe resulting in the data that we're seeing here? And so without needing to go through and do any sort of manual math, we start to aggregate that data for you. That becomes important because now we're showing you more than just numbers. And like we talked about at the beginning, you actually can start to make some decisions on uh, important components of the session. So it all helps you understand, are your sessions balanced? So up at the top here, we're able to see, here's the specific session where we're looking at this metric data. And here's an expanded view where again, we see the programs, targets, and trials run, but we start to see it broken down by 2 programs run per hour. So 6 programs run might have been okay if it was a 1 hour session, not super common. But here we see a 3 hour session, so we're only running 2 programs per hour. And now I have to start to consider, what are my potential barriers? Is there additional support that this individual could receive? Do I need to provide my frontline staff with some more training? Is there a significant number of behavior that we're seeing, which is creating a barrier to being able to target more goals or the number of goals that we would want to see per hour? Is this staff need additional support on what we talked about also in the beginning, learning opportunities? Are they struggling to find opportunities to work through programs? And so maybe it's less about making sure they know the number of programs they should be working on, but more it has to do with finding those learning opportunities, making sure that they're effective, making sure that they can flow with the session, flow with the learner, all skills that are really difficult in the beginning. But by having this data, you start to be able to understand things about the balance of your session and where you might need to offer support. What's also helpful is you can see this across staff. So if Catherine consistently is running 6 programs per hour, but staff B, Kara, is able to run 20 programs and maybe 5 programs per hour, now I can see if there is certain patterns where one staff maybe needs additional support. Is there an opportunity for a peer model? Things like that that can be really beneficial, where you have this data right in front of your face, because we want to make it easier for BCBAs. To take it a step further, we also want this data to be visible for your frontline staff. So they certainly have access to this data if you give them permission. But how do we find tools and how do we embed tools within our system that actually makes sure clinicians, including frontline staff, can make informed decision on how they run their session? For many of the organizations that we work with, this is top of mind. RBTs and frontline staff have a difficult job. Anything we can make their job, any way we can make their job easier is going to be a success. And we know it's going to result in better programming and better treatment. So when we think about how do we take important data like this and also guide that so RBTs can not have to analyze this level of information at every session, but just be able to start to see, I'm going to skip ahead here. We'll go back. Start to see information about, oops, sorry. Start to see information about what programs they need to target and why. So this is a coming soon feature for Motivity. We have a lot of what we call acuity clinical KPI features coming, but we want to put data. So we just saw those session metrics that a BCBA might look at. And again, how do I now use that to make decisions to make it easier for my staff? So, by adding visual cues to a frontline staff within session, some of the research that our team found was this improved the ability to actually run programs based on the prescribed dosage or trial count. And so, having visual indicators like this resulted in RBTs more effectively and more efficiently hitting the prescribed trial count, which is what we want as a BCBA. So a few different examples we see here. Accepting no from results. What this visual indicator informed the technician is that they skipped that program altogether. They did not work on that goal in the previous session, and so they likely want to target that. Whereas accepting no from peers, we see more of a Pac-Man style. So that indicates to the technician that this goal was run, but we didn't hit all of the prescribed trials. And then finally, this last goal, we just have an open circle, which means this goal should be run on occasion. It's not a goal that it's expected to be run every session, especially if you have a learner that has multiple sessions per day. Maybe they work with different RBTs, and so the technician needs to know what happened in the previous session really quickly. Or alternatively, they need to make sure, if there's a goal that we don't want to work on significantly because it is a more aversive goal for that learner, maybe it elicits some emotional or behavioral reactions. We want to be mindful of when it's being targeted, and so these visual indicators are really helpful for team members. So putting tools like this in front of frontline staff, again, what we found, what the research found, was that this resulted in staff more effectively hitting trial count because in addition to the visual indicators that we see on the right side here, this helped inform what was happening in previous sessions. And so they knew maybe what to target, what to hit. We all know, both if you're a frontline staff, if you've done any sort of direct service, there are certain goals that are really fun to run, and there are some goals that are a little bit more aversive for everybody involved. And so those tend to be the ones that get skipped or as a BCBA, maybe I didn't do a good job writing clear teaching instructions. And so now I'm seeing, I see this goal get skipped a lot. Maybe it's not a result of people don't want to run it, but it's more a result of the fact that it's not clear and written technologically. And I need to go back and make some adjustments so that my team is able to target and work on this goal with fidelity. So let's take it a step back and let's go back to that original slide. So now we've seen both sides. Here's what you can see from a clinical perspective. Again, your frontline staff have access to this too, but we wanted to also put this data visible for frontline staff so that they can make decisions and informed session timelines based on data that they're able to see as well, so that they can have that constantly proactive approach that we care about with Motivity. What this also does in terms of clinical decision making also makes sure that you have audit competence and that you're audit ready. So some payers expect a certain number of programs to be run or targets to be run per hour. And so there's certain session intensity standards that can be really difficult to identify if you are hitting without this type of data. Sometimes you need to justify programs per hour. Is the session timeline, length, and content demonstrating medical necessity? And based on the number of proved auth hours or limits, are we seeing progress or not? That's going to be the most important part, of course, is are we seeing progress or not? And so if you have a learner who has been approved for 5 hours per day, but you're only able to schedule for 3 hours because maybe they also go to school, speech, or OT, but you're able to run a number of programs you would want within those 3 hours, and you're seeing progress, that can help guide you or inform you on if you want to ask for 5 hours again, or maybe if 3 or 4 is better suited for that learner because you're still seeing progress and you're able to work on a sufficient number of goals per hour based on maybe what that pair looks like and what you would expect for that individual learner. There's also a lot of learners, as we know, they're in school all day and then maybe they have in-home sessions for ABA. And so their days become incredibly long. And so again, if we're finding that within the time frame that we are able to work with this individual, what's been approved for, or just what simply fits within their schedule, and that hour is still demonstrating to be resulting in progress, all of this type of data helps inform those decisions when it comes to not just audit readiness, but how we think about that next authorization. So again, proactive approach to we asked for 5 hours, we're looking at 3, but we are seeing progress and we are seeing that we're working on the number of goals that we would want during this time frame. So do we need to not ask for 5 this time? And this learner is making progress with 3 hours. And so that type of decision making is huge when it comes to payer relationships as well as audit confidence. But let's go back to the clinical conversation because as clinicians, that's what's exciting about some of the data that we found here. So when we're able to combine these adherence cues, so this data that informs our frontline staff with that metric data that your clinical supervisors and team can do, what this does is it results in that you're able to align your treatment with reality. So when you have cues like this for your staff to utilize and be able to make informed decisions about how to pace their session, what they should be targeting first, and you look at those session metrics, now you start to make those decisions that help guide more quickly. Okay, this is less about I've overloaded. This more has to do with this individual staff member needing a little bit of additional support or vice versa. Because what you're able to do is ensure that medically necessary goals are targeted, because that's what's going to be in your treatment plan for this learner. And that's ultimately how the staff are going to be guided by cues to make sure they are consistently hitting those goals because they're going to have reminders for them. It's going to take some of that response effort away because it's going to be visible for them. Again, like we talked about, it'll help identify whether sessions are overloaded. So if you're seeing that there's consistently 5 programs that have been skipped, and maybe then those programs are not the same ones every time, but you're seeing a consistent number that it's always 5. Okay, that's an easy decision, perhaps, especially if it's across team members, that you need to modify the number of goals that you're actually expecting to be worked on during those sessions. And then again, it allows you to respond proactively to those payer requirements like we just talked about. So one piece of data that I think is really helpful is how this also results in better supervision. So it's not just better clinical decision making when it comes to the number of goals and things like that, but it also has a huge impact on how we look at and are able to support staff. So here's an example where we see RBTA is able to run 40 targets per hour, whereas RBTB is running 15 targets per hour. This enables a clinician to really quickly identify, is there training opportunities? Are we seeing behavioral variability? So are we seeing that under with one staff? I'm sure everybody has had these situations where with RBTB, we're seeing a significant increase in maladaptive behavior as opposed to when with RBTA. And so maybe during your supervision, you're spending closer attention to what is RBTA doing? Are they using some antecedent strategies? Are there other tools that they're maybe using more effectively than RBTB? Or alternatively, are we seeing that RBTA is avoiding certain programs or certain instructions, SDs, and therefore RBTB is seeing an overload of maladaptive behavior? So it already starts to guide you on what might be happening there. Potentially, RBTB just needs a little bit more support. And so that allows for those peer models, like I talked about earlier. And so allowing them with the permission and when it's appropriate to be able to observe those specific sessions because you're seeing that these technicians are able to create more learning opportunities. I think we've all seen there's certain frontline staff who just have a incredible ability to find learning opportunities within any environment that they're in with those learners. And that is the most effective strategy for ABA is when we can keep things as naturalistic as possible, we know that skills are going to generalize. And then what potential barriers do you have to address? So if there is one staff member that is having trouble implementing the number of programs that you would expect or able to work through the number of targets you would expect, what barriers can we potentially address? Is it again, maybe how those teaching instructions have been written? Is RBT able to bring, if it's an in-home session, are they bringing some certain reinforcers? RBTB is not bringing those items. And so how do we make sure RBTB also has all of the materials they need to run those sessions effectively? All of these things result when we have data like this and we can start to make decisions, ultimately it results on you as a BCBA and as clinicians, you're able to start to spend time on the right things. And so as I talked about in the beginning, all of this information is important and it probably comes up a lot more than we even realize. And so if we can start to spend time where we need to more appropriately or faster, then we start to remove some of these barriers. We make sure sessions are running how we would intend or how we would want to demonstrate medical necessity to result in progress. And rather than trying to constantly answer these questions that we just aren't sure about, but it allows you to start to spend your time on the right things and on the appropriate factors within session that are going to make a difference. So we already showed this, and what I want to do is spend some time now on what this looks like within Motivity. So as I said, these features here are coming out. We have a significant number of again, acuity features, some of the research our clinical team is doing on clinical KPIs. And so we're happy to talk with you more. Definitely stay tuned. But what I want to show is now how would you use these? I'd like to see kind of that full circle approach on why this data matters, how sometimes it's forgotten, and what we're doing to make sure that clinicians have this data. So what does this look like from a bigger picture? I'm going to share my screen for a moment here. So what you see in Motivity, if you're totally new, is I have access to these 8 learners. Here's the learner I'm doing supervision on today. Within Motivity, we capture a timeline and report, which is essentially a history of the learner. This is going to track all of your raw session data, session notes, treatment plans, any clinical documents that were captured, and session data that was captured here. So perhaps I want to start to get an idea of what's happening in session, what am I seeing before I get into my supervision. I can filter by seeing just session data. And when I click on this session here, those are the metrics that we saw earlier. If I want, I can take it a step further and I can start to expand so I can see actual raw data and be able to see for this specific target, what did we see in terms of a percentage and my raw data. I can actually open it further to see a timestamp of when this data was collected. But like we talked about, you're not always going to have time to dig in and dig in and dig into this next layer. Now, we're always going to give that to you, but if I'm looking at, I need to just take a glance at what's happened across the last 5 sessions. I want to start to see metrics like this more quickly, and then I can expand to start to see what that looks like on a more average approach. Because again, 6 might be seem okay, but when I actually break that down per hour, that might be a red flag for me. As we talked about, I can also break this down in specific phases. So if I want to see it across all, did we see a significant change? And therefore now, now I'm alerted to there was a lot of behavior that occurred during this session. And that could have been the potential barrier that we saw there. Now I can quickly go compare it to another session. So now here's was Catherine's session. The day before April had a session. Okay, we see it's similar in terms of the programs. Well, excuse me, we see it's different in terms of per hour or total, but now I see a total difference in per hour. That might also red flag to you. Well, this was, of course, not realistic, but this was a 6 minute or 10-minute session, and we ran a significant number of programs, perhaps, or based on that average, gives you an indicator of maybe those timings were off, or more importantly, are you seeing frontline staff that are maybe inflating the actual training opportunity. So was that an actual opportunity? Was your learner attending when you presented that SD? And therefore, are you actually capturing an incorrect response, or simply were you not capturing their attention when you presented it? And so that type of feedback is incredibly helpful too, when again, knowing where to target and where to spend some time. So if I see that we had what would have been 30 programs per hour, I can get an idea of what program was run. Okay, let me actually see if these learning opportunities were legitimate. And I know exactly when I go into that session, I may be going to observe and model how I would want this goal to be run and how I can contrive opportunities within session. We'll click into one more here. But again, what you're seeing is a pattern where before I go into a session, I'm able to start to identify where I want to spend my time. If I'm noticing major differences between staff, if I'm noticing major differences between session days, even maybe sessions occur in different locations. And rather than needing to dig into this data and try to then come up with totals, by having it available to me simply by clicking on this metric data, I know exactly where to spend my time for different staff and for different supervision. We are incredibly excited about how these metrics are going to be a stepping stone for other metrics that we'll be able to provide clinicians when it looks at uh, certain goals for learners where you might need to spend time, where you're seeing things are significantly getting missed, like we talked about earlier, and then being able to aggregate this further across learner groups or organizations. And so these are some of, I always think of them as our prerequisites as we look at expanding and continuing to aggregate this data more and more to give insights to rather than caseload, excuse me, a caseload, an organization. But these prerequisite clinical KPIs we're giving teams, we have the research to say that this is making an impact on treatment intensity, treatment fidelity, and ultimately resulting in more effective sessions day to day for the learners. We're really excited to hear feedback for some of those frontline staff views that we'll be putting out later this month, and definitely stay tuned to see where we go from there. I will stay for a moment in case anybody has questions, but I really appreciate everyone's time today. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.